have your attention, we're going to get started here. Thanks for joining us in person and online. This is for our UNM Rainforest seminar series, and thank you, Tom. I know you're the one who introduced us to our speaker for today. So today we will be hearing from Mackenzie Loy. She is the founder and CEO of the Homemade Marketplace, as well as the New Majority. Mackenzie founded the first homemade marketplace hub in DC to accelerate women entrepreneurs of color building food businesses with a mission to close the racial and gender wealth gap through entrepreneurship, which is very aligned with what we're trying to do here at UNM Rainforest through our tribal entrepreneurship program and other efforts. And then she launched the New Majority, which is a media company making it easier for everyday non-accredited New Majority women and BIPOC individuals and investors to invest directly into founders who look like them. She holds an MPP and an MBA from Georgetown. And prior to grad school, she worked with nonprofits, state agencies, and Fortune 500 companies to launch and grow their innovation programs. And she has a background in sales and business development. To this day, she loves a good SOP and a yes and mentality, and of course, a great union role. Have you gone to Frontier yet?
I have not,
Oh
but
my gosh.
I've gone to a range.
You need to go to
Frontier. Okay.
If you like
Excellent. Day's worth it already.
Go get their sweet roll. But without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mackenzie.
Thanks, Cecilia. Okay. So it's always uncomfortable to hear about yourself. So before I jump in, I want to hear about everybody in this room and hopefully online if our polls work. Zoom polls are always a little funky. So our topic obviously today is equity and debt crowdfunding. We're going to jump into that in a second, but I always like to try and speak to whoever is in the room and meet you where you're at. And make sure that today's hour is valuable for you all as well as me. Hopefully we all get to learn something from each other. So we'll jump into our agenda in a minute. But before I do, can we launch up the polls on Zoom? Okay, so on Zoom, we're going to ask 3 questions, but then I'm going to modify it for the group that's in person a little bit. So just to get a sense of where everyone's at, what everyone's working on, what you're coming to the conversation with from a leadership perspective. Actually, I'm going to do one first. In the room, who is more on the founder side or the funder investor side? So founders first. Okay. And then investors, funders side. Okay. And then online, so we'll ask, so for, I guess this could go out to anybody, but kind of what role do you own within your startup or organization? This question was more geared towards the founders. So if folks online could answer that, and then within the room, who's coming here with more of the founder? Well, I guess there's a lot of founder. Anybody who's more from like a senior leadership or operational at. Okay, there's a few happy. Okay, awesome. And
I have the poll online. So 60% are founders,
okay.
10% CEO, 10% senior leadership, 0% board member.
Okay, a nice little mix, but I feel like we're all kind of leaning a little more on the founder-esque side. Okay, for the founders or senior leadership, second question is, what growth stage is your company at? Are you the idea stage, more proof of concept, MVP? Are we in growth, expansion, or are we maturity and retiring? So for in this room from the founder stage, idea, mulling. Okay, proof of concept, MVP, cool. Okay, growth. Okay, expansion, maturity. Okay, what did we get online?
71% growth stage, it just changed to 63. And
Wild swings with a small sample size.
11% idea, 11% proof of concept.
Okay.
11% expansion, 0%.
Okay, so early to growth stage. And then the last question, so is anyone here currently fundraising? Okay, and then for those who are currently fundraising, like open right now or testing waters, letting people know you'll be opening, legal docs in order.
Close the pre-seed, kind of moving soon to the next round.
Okay, and in the back? Sorry, as you're chewing, so feel free to.
Find companies to like partner with us right now.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, and then online, did we have for anyone who was fundraising where they're at?
Currently 36% and then 18% next 6 months and not sure and not applicable, and then 9% is 1 year plus.
Okay. Okay, so a little bit of a gamut, but it sounds like fundraising is top of mind. So then which is probably why you guys are here. So for anybody online, if you we'll definitely have time at the end for questions. But if you've got something, pop in the chat, and then if it's timely, let's answer as we go. And same for in the room, feel free to stop. Hopefully this is a conversation as we talk. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so where we're going today, now that we all know each other a little bit, is with our introductions, then we are going to go into a super high level equity crowdfunding overview. My goal is for everyone to walk out of here pretty conversational with it, as well as knowing where to dive into next. So knowing that I just said that, who here like is conversational, knows about equity crowdfunding, debt crowdfunding?
I've invested on WeFunder. Doesn't that
Yes, that totally counts. I love it. What did you invest in?
Several companies, Osasa, which is a New Mexican company,
Mhm.
Lil Libros in California.
I also invested in Little Libros. Okay.
Aller Pops, which is also a New Mexico
Okay.
company. There's a few more. I can't remember. I think I've invested in like 5 or 6. I'm very like micro investment.
Yeah, small amounts, but getting the experience. Okay, I love it. So yeah, that's the goal today will be to walk out either more conversational, knowing where you want to dig in, and then if you are currently fundraising, I'd love for you to be able to say, yes, I'm going to pursue it, or and learn more, or like, no, maybe it's not the right fit for me and my company and where I'm at today. I feel like that's equally valuable to know. So we'll talk a little bit more about the other types of crowdfunding, kind of where equity and debt crowdfunding really fit within fundraising journeys, who maybe is like the typical good fit. Everything I say has a caveat in the sense of like, you could be the non-typical and you could just rock the equity crowdfunding space. But we'll talk a little bit more about kind of trends. And then we'll go into a couple of case studies, because having gone to business school, I feel like that everything is like a case study. And I think when you go into business, that's kind of what we're all living out our own case studies right now. And then we'll end with a Q&A, but feel free to pop in with questions. So a little bit more about me than Cecilia shared. So I've embarked on the social entrepreneurship route for the last couple of years. Really started with Homemade in DC, which is the homemade marketplace, online marketplace offering corporate catering. If we were in Albuquerque, I'd have been like, hey, you should cater from Homemade. Everything is sourced from women, people of color, LGBTQ entrepreneurs who are smaller cottage foods. So they're making and baking within their own homes, or maybe they are in commercial kitchens. And really trying to help small businesses, if they want to grow into the next foods, growth stage, and then into the next. And the goal there is really to close the racial and gender wealth gap through food entrepreneurship. While I was at grad school and working on this, I decided to write my thesis on equity crowdfunding. And I was super interested in it because I am not an accredited investor. I left my corporate job, was pursuing entrepreneurship, really took a pay cut on that one, right? But I was meeting all these amazing founders who are building really cool things. And they're all like, we need money. And I was like, well, I've got a couple hundred, I'd love to partake. And so that was through the mechanism would be through equity crowdfunding or debt crowdfunding. I particularly like equity crowdfunding because I like that you're getting a little piece of ownership. Now we can talk about dilution and all of that later, but I really believe in one, building your own company to have the impact you want in the world, but also by building and like creating other ownership opportunities, which can snowball into learning opportunities. You start with WeFunder, then you can grow into angel investing, maybe you grow into other institutional investing. So it's really about ownership on both sides. And so for the new majority, what we do is we'll scan the top equity crowdfunding platforms, pick out new majority founders, so women, people of color, LGBTQ, who are building impact-oriented companies. You don't have to be impact first, but I'm not looking for a buy one, donate one. I'm looking for like, as your revenue grows, your positive impact on the world grows. And obviously a strong business model, because you got to stay in business to, continue having the positive impact. So we try to find those new majority founders and then really lift them up, amplify them, make it easier for them to either launch their campaign, close out their campaign, and get back to the good work that they're doing. So, and I've done a few other things before that, but these are the important things that I'm working on right now. So with that background in mind, oh yes, everyone should go subscribe to the new majority. So the new majority on the right, that's where our featured founders will be populated every other week. We do a write-up and then we do a podcast where we'll interview one of our past featured founders or current featured founders. How's it going? Where are you at? Lessons learned. We have an episode actually dropping tomorrow where on that episode, she was like, yep, we're actually pulling our equity crowdfunding campaign. So it's not always rosy, but it's always interesting. Okay, into the content. Folks can always subscribe later, but just to make sure we are on the same page on what equity crowdfunding is, there's a lot of, I think, misconceptions, but just breaking it down, equity, ownership, shares, right? Crowdfunding from your crowd, from your community. So this opened up investing to everyday investors, which I still kind of wrestle with that term of what everyday is. But essentially, non-accredited investors could now invest as little as $100 into private companies, also known as Reg CF, equity crowdfunding. Relatively new, we'll go into that in a second. But before we do, there are other types of crowdfunding, and I just want to make sure that we're talking today about equity and debt. Donation base has been around for a long time, so that would be like Kiva, GoFundMe's. You're putting money in, and you're definitely not going to get it back. You're donating it, right? Versus product-based. So you have Kickstarter, Indiegogo. You're putting your money in. Maybe it's for this cool sweatshirt, or it's for a cool something that just hasn't been made yet. So you're kind of providing the funding to help get that first prototype out. Really good if you do have like a consumer good or something that anything in manufacturing, I feel like that's consumer good lends itself really well to product-based. And then debt-based is some of my favorite platforms are SMBX, Honeycomb Credit, and Mainvest. And so this is where you're putting your money in. Generally, it's for a loan or a bond, and there'll be a set percentage interest rate, a set payback time. Most of them are at a minimum 3 years, but I've seen 5 or even 10 years, which gets quite long from a debt perspective. But for the new majority, we focus mostly on equity crowdfunding, but I do like the debt-based crowdfunding because it brings in generally a different mix of companies. And also I'm big about diversifying your portfolio in many ways, obviously, but the debt side makes a lot of sense as well. So today we are going to focus mostly on equity and debt, but wanted to just bring up these other types of crowdfunding as well. So mostly just because I wrote my thesis on equity crowdfunding, I want to give a little bit of a history on it. If you aren't super familiar with it, or if someone you're talking to is not super familiar with it, that's because it's still, I would say, relatively new. In 2012, it was part of the Jobs Act passed by President Obama. And that was where it really brought equity crowdfunding into kind of the policy sphere within the US. It had already been established within other markets like the UK, but this was the first time it was really brought to the US. That being said, it wasn't implemented until 2016. So even though it's been around since 2012, we haven't actually been able to use it. The SEC implemented it. And then 2017 was really the first year that like you could actually, as a founder, go and fundraise through equity crowdfunding, or you as an investor could go and make an investment. And since then, we have seen, I would say, like a fairly steady increase year after year. COVID was funky for everybody, obviously. So there's a little bit of a flat down, and then I think they'll pop back up. But some of the things that I also wanted to raise was in 2020, 2021 is where there were some key updates to equity crowdfunding that made it, I think, a lot more feasible for founders raising, but also made it a bit more friendly for any follow-on investors. When I first started getting into equity crowdfunding pre-MBA and MPP, but then also talking to, in all of my like entrepreneurship and VC classes, I was like, what do you think about equity crowdfunding, to like the VCs who would come in and talk to us in class? And they're like, oh, we hate it. Like, I don't like it. I've been burned by this one thing. And I think that there's a change though in some of the trends around that. And I think that a lot of that came from the initial equity crowdfunding policy. With the changes, one, it increased kind of the dollar amount that you could actually raise through equity crowdfunding. So depending on the type of company, if we're going into batteries and cars, like 1 million is not going to get you anywhere, right? But 5 million might be a good starting point. Now there's SPVs. So instead of having literally, like if you invest in Lilly Bros and every single person was listed on the cap table, that's obviously a problem. And so with the new policy changes, there's one lead investor and everyone else kind of comes up underneath them, but doesn't have like voting rights or anything like that. But you do get to still get the investor updates. And then the last one is test the waters. I think this one's a little bit interesting, to be honest, but equity crowdfunding is a campaign, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And so before you go and you do all the legal documents and kind of take all that time, maybe you want to see, like, is there any appetite in my crowdfunding campaign? So Test the Waters allowed you to publicly like put that out there and say, this is what we're thinking about, kind of raise your hand if you're interested. And then if you do get a good response, you could launch your full campaign afterwards. But before that was illegal. So you kind of just had to like launch blind and hope that you knew your potential investor community. So that's the history of equity crowdfunding. I realize I kind of glazed over this, but does everybody know accredited investor versus non-accredited? Okay. So essentially, when we're saying everyday investors, we're saying non-accredited. So you don't, you're not making $200,000 per year, or you don't have a net worth of 1 million minus your primary house, yet, right? You're working on it. But obviously, investing in private companies, whether you're doing it through equity crowdfunding or other, it's quite risky, right? And so that's kind of where that accredited investor designation comes from. That being said, I believe that people are quite smart, quite intelligent, can do some of the due diligence, make these decisions themselves. But we'll talk about how it is quite risky, and I can even share my first investment that did not go that well, but it was a great learning experience. But I think so from an investor's perspective, equity crowdfunding really opened up what you could invest in and who could invest in something. And then from the founder side, it's really opened up, depending on the type of company, it's opened up capital access to, you could reach out to your customers, you could reach out to friends and family, you could get them involved, and you may not need that warm introduction to the institutional capital. So obviously, the new majority, closing the racial and gender wealth gap, right, through entrepreneurship and investing. I'm very interested in the kind of opening up of opportunities. And it's also about not just opening that up, but making sure that everyone's learning about the opportunities at the same time. Everybody's kind of gaining access, not just in name only. Okay, so we heard about one of the top equity crowdfunding platforms already, WeFunder. Second top one is probably, yeah.
Right.
No, don't say sorry.
It's like, so would you just talk about the test the waters, like how that actually happens, or how you get
Yeah.
the people that you send it to?
Yeah, so all equity crowdfunding has to go through, actually, I'll just do this next one anyways, through a platform. You need to have, you need to be a registered broker platform, and on here, you can actually go and say, I'm launching like a test the water campaign. So it'll look very similar. You will have kind of what you're looking to raise. Depending on if you're doing, you know, a price round or anything like that, you can have the prices versus maybe it's a convertible note. The thing is, so then you'll run that for a certain amount of time. You'll probably do your same email marketing, reaching out to any customers, sharing it, social media. And then after a certain time, if you do not hit your benchmark or goals, you'll probably withdraw the campaign. If you are ready to then launch it, that's where then you'll reach back out to the people who said, I'm interested, I'd like, and then ask them to actually put in the money and make the deposit. The reason why I don't love the Tesla Waters as much is it's almost twice the work for the founder. And there's going to be a drop-off rate. Even though, you know, you've got 100 people that raise their hand, you'll probably get about 70 to 80% will actually come back. So you got to ask people twice, which is always a thing. But it has been effective for, like I said, I feel like, you know, the kind of lean business model, MVP, put up a splash page before you build the product, right? Like it's along those kind of lines. So these are the top equity crowdfunding platforms currently. Each one has a little bit of a different vibe, I guess, or reputation. And I would say that there's also been some consolidation in the space around equity crowdfunding platforms. So I think it was a little slow. Like we said, it was passed in 2012, implemented in 2016, and we're continuing to see more growth and interest, I think, because the platforms that you can actually launch and invest your equity crowdfunding campaigns had to get going. They had to work the kinks out themselves, right? And so we've seen a lot of growth in like really niche equity crowdfunding platforms. So there's ones for like climate, there's ones for food, there's ones for hyperlocal, and I think we're starting to see some consolidation. So I want to highlight the three that probably make up 80, maybe 85% of like the bulk of transactions and campaigns. Obviously pros and cons, so just going a little bit beyond what's on the slide, but if you are looking to raise, you really want to think about what type of platform you're going on to. I feel like WeFunder is very mission oriented. Republic has a lot of different types of alternative investments on it. They went really into, I feel like, crypto and I would say like maybe higher tech or deep tech. So if you are, when you go onto these platforms and you're looking to raise, it's not just about the investors that you're bringing to the platform, but you're also looking to see what are the other types of investors on those platforms. And, you know, so I think that they would like me and my company and be willing to invest in us. And so when you go to different platforms, that's something that you'd want to consider. And then Start Engine is based out of Canada, and they're really interesting because they have started a secondary market. So when you're investing in a private company, typically as an angel VC, we're looking at like 4, 7, 10 years on maybe more on when you're gonna get your investment back. Equity crowdfunding, it speaks very similarly. We'll talk about kind of stage that equity crowdfunding fits in, but when I invested in Little Libros as well, I have no expectation of getting my money back a year, 2 years, 3 years, or even maybe never, right? Because this is a very risky investment. But Start Engine started a secondary market. So it's really still small in early stages, but starting to create kind of that secondary where I could potentially sell my Little Libros investment to somebody else and get a little liquidity earlier rather than potentially never. So that's an interesting aspect. Okay. So this was more thinking about, I was thinking from a founder perspective, if you are thinking about equity crowdfunding, maybe thinking about, is your company the right fit? When you go onto any of these platforms, I mean, you can search, the searches aren't that great. So a lot of times we are literally looking through every single new campaign that has come out to see if they fit the new majority thesis. But you will be able to search by industry. Generally, you can search by geography, by size. And the types of companies that we've seen that have done historically well on equity, historically, it's been like 5 years, but you know, historically well, you have a large customer base. So I love equity crowdfunding because if you've got amazing customers who love your product, they already know you, your mission, right? And what an easy next step to say, you love our product, like join us, you know, invest in us and help us build that product to be even better. So if you have a large customer base, I think that's also a built-in investor base, and it really aligns incentives nicely. And you can really turn that customer into a customer evangelist, right? What does that mean? A lot of times that means that CPGs do really well. They're out there, they are probably on social media a lot, they run a lot of these campaigns. That being said, when we look at like B2B or tech or software, that is generally quite scalable, right? Really good margins. And so you'll see a lot of those companies as well. There's been a lot of also like health pharma companies that have been on crowdfunding campaigns. My partner works in the healthcare industry, and I was like, so what do you think about things? And he was like, honestly, like, I don't know. There's so much, but yeah.
I was just going to ask a question about that. Because this seemed very consumer product or software based, the equity crowdfunding, but you're seeing it work in like deep tech, hard tech, sciencey things.
Yeah, and I think that what that means is you want to look for the platforms where there's more of a concentration of those types of companies, because you can also see the investors on the platforms. Like you can put like what kind of tags that you're most interested in, right? And so you can see who says like they're into space or deep tech, or I feel like AI used to be kind of niche, and now it's like everyone's an AI company. So it's kind of blown up the category. But I do think that that means is if you look at like average check size too, that has been, it's different for each platform. And it's kind of hard to find that information. Some of the
I
platforms
was just going to ask, where do you get those data?
want to share that. Yeah. I did a web scraping project when I was in grad school, and I was pulling to see kind of how many investors are on each platform versus active investors who have done more than one investment within the platform. And so they're repeat investors, and then average check sizes. And so it'll be different. I think that information is going to be a lot more interesting as we get more data coming out. The minimums will differ on different campaigns. So for the new majority, we primarily will feature companies who have $100, $200 minimums. But we did one that was called Recompose. So it was human composting once you're dead.
Okay.
But their minimum was 1,000. So then if you look at like check size, I think you want to look at check sizes, but also what were different minimums, because that's going to drive that too. And then the last kind of criteria for if you are considering equity crowdfunding is having an exit plan. If I invest in your company, I would like to know when hopefully my money is coming back. This is an investment, it's not a donation. And so when we are looking for new majority founded companies, we're looking for companies that can clearly articulate, obviously, this is how much I'm raising, these are the milestones that I'm looking to achieve. And kind of these are the either exit opportunities or comps of companies that have are in our space, and this is kind of where they've gone. And so I think that's important for on the homemade and DC side. I do talk to a lot of CPGs, and they're like, oh, we've heard of equity crowdfunding, I think it's a good fit. And I think the next conversation is always like, well, where do you anticipate growing your company? What are you looking to do with it? How would you either pay back, or if it's debt crowdfunding, or how are you going to return that investment? And that's where the conversation generally like pauses for a few months. And so that's something that I think if you are a founder and you're thinking about, obviously, what's my exit? Your investors are obviously thinking about that probably more frequently than you. And then from an investor side, when you're looking at these campaigns and you're looking at their pitch decks, like a lot of times you'll see that missing at the end. And that's a great question to ask on the discussion boards. It's a great question that probably we're all wondering too. But I think it's a key criteria to be a good fit for these campaigns and to actually have a successful one. Any questions on types of companies that are good fits? Okay. So then thinking about from a fundraising journey, where does equity or debt crowdfunding really fit? I would say this has shifted in the earlier, maybe a few years ago, it would have been more on the pre-seed. And now, although I feel like there's a lot of definition changes around what is pre-seed, and I heard someone even say like a dirt round, and I was like, what is a dirt round? So always worth double checking what people mean, right? But equity crowdfunding, I think, going from like the Kickstarter type crowdfunding, people were like, oh, equity crowdfunding, we're going to go early stage. And I think that we've seen a general shift more towards later stage round. And I put under their community round because especially on WeFunder, we've seen kind of side-by-side rounds. So one of the companies we featured, Throne, they do like smart, accessible toilets, like public bathrooms, and they were raising their Series A, and then they opened up a side-by-side on WeFunder, and it was the same exact terms, which was really interesting. And very aligned with my mission and my principles, but that was a choice that they had made. And so the CEO was really working on closing the round, but then the CMO was really focused on the equity crowdfunding aspect. And it was a way for them to get their, a lot of their like suppliers and partners were able to then invest in Throne, but also their customers, and they're starting to reach out to a lot of different customers that, I mean, if you think about who uses public bathrooms, it's a pretty wide and diverse group, and so they were trying to reach that group as well. So the takeaway from this is I do think that early stage is still available, but I think if you are raising a later round, the equity crowdfunding is also becoming a way for you to let your customers, your valued partners hop in, as well as live a little bit more along your mission if you are a mission-oriented company.
Could I follow up on that?
Yeah.
So you're saying that a Series A professional investor like a venture capital firm might allow a company to use equity crowdfunding and bring in smaller investors on the same terms?
For Throne that they did, yeah. No, you're not voting. I mean, when we invested in
Not gonna get
Throne,
preferred shares or.
it was still, I don't know for them. I'd have to double check on what those terms were, but there's no voting power, there's no kind of say. It's under the one, there's one lead investor that kind of holds all of it. It was certainly not the same size, so I think that they were raising like 600,000, someone can fact check me on this one. But then they're raising a couple million.
I'm a professional investor. Okay.
So it wasn't like total parity on that side. But as far as
Well,
like,
it's interesting that's even possible. It never occurred to me.
yeah, and I think for them, if you look at their values and their mission, it really aligned well with it. And then they were looking for a way for their, like I said, friends, family, and then they work with a lot of mechanics, a lot of janitorial staff, and a lot of more, I would say, maybe on the blue collar is who like their company is built with, and they wanted to provide this opportunity. It felt a little dissonant for them to just raise and not.
Cool.
So looking at a successful case study example, this one's kind of interesting because Max did this. She was really early, so like she was one of the first founders to raise over 1 million through equity crowdfunding on WeFunder, and now I feel like we're seeing that a lot more commonly. Also, once they raised it, the limit to 5, you saw a lot more. But she raised through equity crowdfunding in 2019, so she was like early, and she will tell you all the good and the bad on equity crowdfunding. But the bottom line was when I was like, would you do it again? She was like, yes, absolutely. Given who we were as a company, what our product was, it made a lot of sense. And it had kind of dividends, not just from the capital raised, but also just brand awareness. And it helped from a product perspective. So they are a video platform that was for children and family. Like, I think the original use case was like kids and grandparents to connect. Took off during the pandemic, so had some good timing on that side. And then was acquired by Mattel a couple of, time has escaped, 1 to 2 years ago. So kind of after pandemic. So they were a pretty small team when they raised. That being said, they were a team of 5 full-time employees. And so that meant that even though she is the founder, she took it on as her day job, like for this 6-month period, to like every day she was like, I'm going to post on social media. I'm going to post about our campaign. I'm going to make sure that I have something to post on social media. So she would do like a Twitter talk just to be able to post something and to kind of drive this like momentum behind it. And so she really took the fact that like this is a campaign, right, to like the T. And they ended up raising, she had set aside 6 months. They raised over $1 million in 73 days. So she was driving like, this is coming, this is coming, this has come, this has come, don't miss out, right? And I think, side note, there's a little bit on the like fear of missing out that like psychology, you definitely, if you're a founder and you're raising through equity crowdfunding, you are pushing that. Me is kind of from like a, we're looking at everyday investors. This could be your first investment within a private company. I'm always like, do your emergency fund first, do your retirement first, and then maybe then come to equity crowdfunding. So I think there's a little, you gotta be careful about that. But if you are a founder raising through equity crowdfunding, you really are trying to push the FOMO buttons. So generally, this is just another stat for everyone. When they were raising, so there was only like a dozen or so who had ever raised more than $1 million. She was the first women and the first Latinx founder to do so, but the average time for those companies to raise over $1 million was about 83 days. So she was faster than that, but I think the takeaway from that is you want momentum. Nothing's worse than having a campaign that's been open for like a year and it's kind of like, did you really need that money a year ago? Or like, how are you surviving? So that opens a lot of questions. So timing is important.
Do you happen to know what the exit amount was?
It wasn't made public, no. But when I was talking to her, I don't think that it was the best terms, like it was the best exit. She's not retired.
There's
But
big multiples on
yeah,
dollars.
yeah, no, I don't know that one.
Just curious.
I The other stats for when they did do their raise was they had over 1,500 investors join in. So it was a big kind of number, which did mean that there was a range of like large to small check sizes. And 22% of those investors were women, 15% were people of color. So if we, you know, again, this is kind of going back to my thesis, and I was like asking, does equity crowdfunding actually diversify the founders who will get funded? Because if we're diversifying the investor pool, do we end up getting a more diverse group that gets funded? And for my thesis, it's online if anybody wants to read it. It was like very small. It was like 0.001% like impact, but it was statistically significant. So that was a plus. But I think the takeaway from that is I think there's a lot of potential, especially when we look at the types of companies that are on there. When we look at, is there gender parity amongst founders who are raising on these platforms? What are the investor breakdowns? I think there's a lot of potential for that effect. If we diversify the investor pool, we'll diversify founders who get funded. I think it's going to take a few more years for that to really come out. Other key learnings from this were, as I mentioned, truly full-time effort. They really leveraged their customer base and then expanded their customer base. So not only were they marketing the investment opportunity to their customers, but then investors came, but then also became customers. So it was a really nice kind of positive feedback loop. And for them, this was part of this was their seed round. So for them, this was quite early stage for them.
Do you know, like, at what point you started the concept and development prior to?
I think it was in 2016 or 2015. So she'd been working on it for a couple of years. She was in education beforehand. Yeah. So and key learnings. A less rosy case study is Miles, who gave me permission to share his less rosy case study. So Miles is mac and cheese. They're doing really well now, so you might find them. Definitely, if you're in the Mid-Atlantic, you'll see them within like Target and Whole Foods and Sprouts. So they were based in DC, and they're like frozen mac and cheese in the freezer aisle that's supposed to be like better for you mac and cheese. And I have tasted it and it's really good. So they launched in 2018. They bootstrapped for a couple of years, had raised a small debt round of $35,000 through Honeycomb Credit, which is a debt crowdfunding platform. Had success with that, even though it was quite small, and decided to then launch an equity crowdfunding an equity crowdfunding campaign. Ultimately, he ended up, and this was on Republic as well, so a different platform. Ultimately, he pulled it, so he did a test the waters and then pulled it before it went live. And his kind of key takeaways were that, let's see, he was a solo founder working part-time on the company. So he still had a full-time job that was helping pay the bills while he got this going. So not only was he not full-time dedicated to the company, but he didn't have a team to run it. And he'll be the first to tell you that he's like not a social media savant. They did have traction. But if you had looked at his first kind of pitch deck that was on Republic, it kind of looked like it was a first edition of a pitch deck. So just kind of everything around the campaign wasn't really dialed in. He didn't have a specific problem. He was still kind of recipe testing some of the mac and cheeses. He was not yet able to say, we're in Target, we're in Whole Foods, we're in Sprouts, go try it and then invest in us, right? He wasn't able to have that conversation versus Max of Caribou was like, we're launched, we're out here, people love us. Your grandfather will love us, like test it out, come invest and then come back. So he wasn't able to really tell that story. And also the other side of it was they were looking not just for the capital, but also for strategic partners for those introductions to buyers they were looking to get into an accelerator. And so I think this goes back to, you know, when you are looking to raise from more institutional investors, it's not just about the money, right? It's also about what are the introductions, maybe there's customers, maybe there's strategic partners. And so that's what he was looking for. And ultimately he pulled his campaign, took a little time, built up a little bit more, and he just closed his pre-seed round. And part of those funders are like big brands, or big names like Andreessen Horowitz, who's part of one of their talent TNO accelerator. So I think that's what he was looking for, and he was looking to get that out of the equity crowdfunding campaign. Didn't quite match up because those were two different things. So ultimately it was not a success for him. It's something that he's like, honestly, would I go back and do it? Maybe, but right now we've gotten enough capital. We've got the connections. We are building out our team, but we don't have a team member that could do this full time for 3 to 6 months. So Miles was like, yeah, we'll probably hold on that for now. But wanted to share an example of, you would think like, you know, CPG, you think it would do really well, it's available. But I also do think food is kind of hard sometimes on these platforms. So with that, I feel like I talked a lot, but any questions or thoughts? Anybody now thinking about it or not thinking about it?
That combined thing is very, we have a lot of military guys that want to invest that are not accredited. Like doing if we could swing that would be really interesting, like a VC plus. Right?
A side by side.
Yeah.
One I think you have to think about is how many want to invest, and is there another vehicle that would look good? Are you kind of just throwing this up just so like a couple of people could come in, or are you there the impetus, but then you think, hey, there could be a lot more folks that are interested?
Yeah, I'm thinking like 30 to 50 plus people. Yeah.
And then I would think, do you think that could be matched by 50, 100, couple hundred more within these different platforms? Who could then not just invest, but I'm always looking for like a win-win ideally, right? So like, could they be potential customers? Could they be larger check sizes? So we were talking about active or like repeat investors. I would go and look at the different platforms and see like who really aligns with like battery, car, you know, and see kind of what, and then you might talk to one of those platforms and say, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Because also when you raise through each of these platforms, there is a fee, right?
Yeah.
There's a cost to launching on there. Generally, I would say it ranges from 4 to 8% of the round.
Really?
It's like investment bankers.
Any other questions? Or any questions online? I feel like we totally zoomed past.
One person asked if you're familiar with Halcyon, the platform
Halcyon?
Halcyon?
Yeah.
Is it like Halcyon House, Halcyon.org?
I think halcyonhouse.org.
Super familiar, because we were a part of one of their cohorts. So I'm trying to build a connection though to equity and debt crowdfunding.
No, he just asked the question and I guess he's participating.
Oh, does it say the name or who is it?
It's Kaizen Rhino.
Well, if you're out there, you should email me. Either Mackenzie at thenewmajorityinvest.com or Mackenzie at homemadendc.com. So for everyone else who's like, what is Halcyon? Halcyon is a nonprofit in DC that's a social enterprise incubator. So I was a part of their opportunity intensive cohort through Homemade in DC. And they do, so they focus on social enterprises, anybody who is for profit, so no nonprofits, mission oriented. The opportunity intensive program was focused around the DMV if you're working or from an opportunity zone. And now they have a lot of programs where they're working with folks from Africa, MENA, and like they'll go international. But they do have an angel investing group. But they are purely angel investing. You have to be accredited. No debt or equity crowdfunding opportunities through them. Although I do think they should.
As far as like a company preparing, or if they're not really sure if this is the right type of funding for them, what would be some steps that they could like go through, kind of see, okay, is this something that's right for my company, or is this not the direction?
And I think the first steps are for fundraising generally. My firm belief, and this doesn't work for all types of companies, is revenue is the best source of capital. So let's go get that revenue first.
So,
And then, that's
cures all
because
problems.
you are a business generally, right? Second best is grants, free money. And then third is, if we're looking for, that's when you would go to fundraising, or you might go to the local bank or CDFI. So I think it's still the same questions are kind of how much are you looking to raise and why, and what kind of runway does that give you? What are the milestones and outcomes? If you raise 100, will you be able to turn that into 200? What's kind of the multiplier that or the outcomes that are possible? And then I think that will start to direct you into the types of fundraising you might look at. And then if you have decided, hey, from a community perspective, I've got strong customer base. I've got a lot of people who have said to me, even just, over drinks, like, hey, like, I'd invest in you if you ever got something going, right? If you have a lot of those folks who come to you and say that. And then you also have, a strong social media, email campaign, a way to really communicate with potential customer investors or potential investors. That's something that I think you might start to lean towards equity crowdfunding or debt crowdfunding. If you are in stealth mode, I don't think anybody is going to want to invest in you. I think that's just a different type of investor that you're looking for. And then last but not least, like, it's a campaign. This is a multi-month commitment. Just because you launch it does not mean that people will come. We try at the New Majority to, like, if you launch it, bring a flood of people, or we try to close out your campaign so that the founders can get back to the work they're doing. But when we talk to founders and we're featuring them, I think there's a general excitement and like, why are you doing it? What's in it for you? You want a percentage? I'm like, well, if you're offering, great, I'll take it. But no, I think it's really hard to stand out still. Even on these platforms, there are hundreds of companies that are fundraising. And part of why I started the New Majority was, as an MBA, I was like, I should know a little something about this now, and like I was like, I don't know, like, how am I supposed to differentiate? And so having a method, having a theory, having a write-up, having some comparisons, being able to share that information has been really helpful to the founders and potential funders that are part of the New Majority Investor Circle. But if you're a founder and you can't easily answer those questions, and you don't have the materials to go for it and the time to answer those questions, then maybe it's not the right fit.
There's another question in the chat that just says what are the top 3 critical steps needed in preparation for crowdfunding? So what would you say?
So just the first one is for any crowd or any fundraising, right? Like, how much are you raising? What are you looking to do with it? Is this the right move for your company? Once you've decided that, then I would say looking and comparing the top equity crowdfunding platforms. So if whoever, I'm happy to chat with them. I'm happy to make introductions to all of the platforms. But you want to look again for who are the platforms that maybe, it's kind of weird, but like have companies that are similar to yours, because then that means that there's investors already on that platform that have invested in, it doesn't have to be your competitor, right? But like, they are going to be familiar with your type of company, what you're offering, and they might want to add you to their portfolio. So looking at the type of platform. And then once you do that, each one of the platforms will have their own, like, you need to fill out this, this, and this. But at a minimum, you're going to need, you should probably get a lawyer, but you're gonna need, you know, a pitch deck, you're going to need some of the basic information, you're gonna wanna have a campaign plan. So, but each one of the platforms will be able to help with that. So amount, decide the platform, and then your third step will be following theirs.
You go ahead and then I'll ask the next question.
My question is, how does the new majority do their due diligence on companies?
So the very first one that company we featured, we're like pseudo VCs, but without being VCs. And so we went like deep in and we did like a 10-page memo. My partner at the time, he worked for a VC and was going to work for one after. And we realized that like nobody read our due diligence memo. It was too long and too in-depth. And then the one person who did read it, she worked at a fintech VC firm, and she was like, it wasn't in-depth enough. Like, I still had so many questions. So I tell you that to say that our due diligence is we're looking for new majority founded women, person of color, LGBTQ. Obviously, on one of the crowdfunding platforms, you have to currently be raising and have an opportunity for everyday non-accredited investors. We're looking for a strong business, strong financial models. I love revenue. I love sales. I lean away from the pre-revenue. We're going to the moon, you know, just take my word for it. So I'm looking for a strong business model, and then impact built into the business model. So I'm not looking for a buy one, donate one. I'm looking for like the problem you're solving is so critical to the world, and the solution you're offering is actually solving it in a way that will both create the wins for the business, the wins for the beneficiaries, the wins for the customers, like win. So I'm looking for the impact side as well. And then we'll do a little extra due diligence to round out our profile of them. So we're looking to see who else has invested, what they've invested in, what their track records are. So we'll look at if there's a VC or accelerators that they've been part of, incubators. We're looking at press mentions. Are you in the news? Are you partnering with people? Does anybody else know that you're out there? So some things like that, but it's definitely not like on the level of, I would say, angel investing groups or VCs. We're taking what's already out there and kind of putting it into this nice, easy to read package that like, hey, are you interested in investing $100, $200 in? Yeah, I'll spend 10 minutes reading it, another 10 minutes clicking links. Okay, that's kind of who our target is. Angel curious, you want to dip your toes, you want to learn by doing, you invest, you get the quarterly or monthly investor update afterwards, and you're like, okay, I'm learning a little something about this. And then my picture is you get a little more savvy, you may become accredited, you may do angel investing on your own or go into VC funding if you want to become an LP, but you've got this portfolio where you're like, yeah, I've invested in 25 companies. Here's my industry breakdowns. I lean more towards these companies. Like for me, we generally won't feature a space or a deep tech company because I'm just like, I just don't really know enough to like say anything about that. So you'll start to develop your thesis. But yeah, I mean, we're turning out a featured founder every other week. So it's not like, yeah, it's not like super deep. But again, you're making $100, $200 investments. Are you going to read a 10-page memo? And we found our audience said no.
10 sentences, maybe.
Well, we got emojis in there now. We've got like bolding, formatting. Yeah.
Just one more question in the chat. This is from Paulina Goldstein. When would you choose equity crowdfunding over product-based funding if you need to run a campaign for either?
I would not give up the equity if you don't need to.
So just go for the product-based unless you need to.
Yeah, so I think if you're doing a product-based, are you doing, like we had talked about, like sweatshirts? I only say sweatshirts because that was what, like 10 years ago, my roommate had like done one of these. It was like early stage and he never got the sweatshirt because they didn't raise enough. So that was his lesson in that. But yeah, if you don't have to give up equity, don't give up the equity. So that's the first instinctual answer. And then the second one is, I think if we are doing product-based and depending on how much it's gonna cost you to develop, build, produce your product, yeah, if you can have someone to help defray those costs up front and then the cash flow comes out later, I think that's the first one. Especially since the level of effort will probably be similar.
The size of the new majority coming up. What's your company like?
We're tiny. We're super tiny. I'm building both at the same time, which is, I'm sure everyone in this room would say not a good idea, and here I am. Yeah, so we're super tiny. I have a great group of interns and a part-time chief of staff working with me on both. We've gotten into a really great cadence for featured founders. We played with once a month, 10 a quarter, but we've settled into an every other week for featured founders, and our podcast comes out once a month. And then I think what we're trying to do is just slowly build our subscriber, our membership base partners. And that's why I say we're a media company, even though I don't love that. But eventually I could see where we would grow into is an equity crowdfunding platform for new majority founders. My dream is and I as a founder know this, I don't want to spend 6 months asking people for money. I just want to launch it, have people come and then close out, and I want to deploy the capital. So that's kind of what we are trying to do, but it's slow. It's not, super tiny. Anything else?
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Such a fun way to break up my day. So I appreciate y'all coming out. But yeah, and reach out with any questions, talk to each other, because this is the best part about crowdfunding is the crowd. So thank you all. And Cecilia, you can put, if you want to put my email into the chat, and folks can reach out if they have questions.
Going back and forth with Greg Perry.
No, we are nomadic now. We've been in Albuquerque for the past few weeks and we'll be until next Wednesday. And then we're going to Phoenix and then we're going to different places. For the new majority, I envision our subscribers and founders are coming from everywhere. So this is really fun to just meet different people and hopefully everyone subscribes, but, and then for Homemade in DC, I think a Homemade in Albuquerque, there's so much, there's starting to be tech here, it seems like. Yeah, but there's so from the outsider perspective.
Not all of it's commercialized.
Fair. Well, I did go to the nuclear museum and I was so interesting. Yeah, but so I could see a Homemade in Albuquerque.